This is a spoiler episode for Umineko. This will contain full spoilers. This will discuss events from all the way through the whole game. Do not watch it if you do not want to know very key details, especially because I will not be explaining them. This episode in particular will cover parts 7, 8, and 9 of my Let's Play, because each individual one didn't have a ton to talk about, but also they are a little bit linked, and so I ended up going deeper and deeper on certain things. And content warning for this spoiler episode, from just after about 6 minutes to about 16 minutes into the video, there'll be a discussion of abuse. There are timestamps of exactly when that happens below, and there will be an on-screen bit of text indicating exactly when the discussion is happening that will disappear after the discussion completes.
This is just
so let's get started. The kids attempting to unpack the riddle.
It sounds.
Given that I know the answer to the riddle, there's a lot here that didn't feel like I could talk about without just straight up saying, well, I know what the actual answer is. But it's interesting to me the way in which they all start from an initial failure for the premise, because they don't know Kinzo. They're talking about his, hometown, his, beloved hometown. He hated his, early life. He actually, really despised where he grew up. I don't remember the exact details of which town. I know the broad strokes of how the riddle works, but I don't remember the exact details. But a person needs to know Kinzo to be able to unpack his riddle. And there's a funny, Battler even kind of reverse points this out by saying, can't we just skip the part with the key? Can we just move on and just ignore all of that stuff? Battler wants to jump ahead without understanding the premise of the riddle itself. And the very start of the riddle insists, you will not even be at the right initial point unless you know this man, know how he thinks, know his history. You need to understand him. Which will later be echoed in a different way, but by the phrase, without love it cannot be seen. You need love, you need understanding to communicate properly with people, and what is the riddle but a game, but a form of communication? Also, a brief addendum to a previous conversation about riddle stuff. From discussion in the comments, it did occur to me that also, another way I might read the resurrection of the dead is about the multiple people that share the one body. Kinzo's grandchild, which has multiple people, we will later see feel as though there needs to be a singular dominant personality. We will untangle that thread as it comes up more concretely. But we do know early on there are a lot of hints about Canon Shannon not being people, and even Beatrice not being a person, at least not in the same way. That we'll see, obviously haven't gotten a lot of that directly. But you could also read the resurrection of the dead and the sacrifices about letting go of the other persons from that body and having only one be there. And specifically the part that's kind of especially confusing and interesting is the way in which Beatrice is revived and then goes away again. Which you could read that as being Beatrice as a person will come out, Beatrice will take some actions, will do some stuff, stir some shit, and then will go away and will let either Shannon or Canon take over and be the person who will continue to live in this body. There's some scattered thoughts about Maria, both with this and the next part, that I kind of want to address here, which is that Maria gets condescended to and misunderstood. I've talked about that a little bit, but she is more capable and smarter and a little bit more grown up than people give her credit for. Her social skills don't sell well. Her strengths? She has skills and talents, and magic is obviously one here where she is providing magical services to Jessica and Battler. Later, she's going to read the letter incredibly confidently. She's just going to read through a quite dense letter that Beatrice has written, and it's not going to be in Maria's voice, and it's not going to be in simple language, but Maria just quite confidently just bangs through that letter with no trouble. her memory is also very sharp. When they go looking for the rose, she knows exactly where it's supposed to be. She has no doubts about that. The others just kind of think, well, it's probably somewhere else. Let's keep looking elsewhere. But she knows. She is adamant about staying, not because she's a stubborn child who doesn't know any better. Maybe a little bit of that too. But because she's confident in where she has left it, and she doesn't see any point in looking somewhere else when she knows it won't be there. At this point, I will reveal my Goda villain theory, which is that I think Goda is the one who took the rose. Because he scattered rose petals over their desserts. I think he may have taken, probably not literally just one rose, but I presume he might have taken one of the roses that didn't look like it was doing as well, and made the reasonable assumption that, well, they won't miss a rose that's not doing well. I'll leave the beautiful ones and make sure I'm not picking those, but I'll just take some of the ones that are just not as good anyway. Which I could make some quite dark reads and some unfavorable thoughts about what that would say about Goda, but I don't think I need to get into that when it's just a theory that doesn't matter that much, honestly. It was just a fun thought because the rose technically never comes back, although Maria will later have some magical times with Beatrice, and that'll be fun. And content warning, because here is what we're going to get into some abuse. So Rose is a bit of a piece of shit. The way in which she hits Maria here is also pretty horrific because of how it implies a pattern. And again, abuse being about patterns and cycles is like old hat. That's often true. That's not... I don't need to go in depth on how that works. But it's so clear from the get-go what's happening here. It's like written really well of how you just know, oh, this is what happens all the time. Rosa refers to having to do this and how she still hasn't learned her lesson. Rosa blames Maria for her flying off the handle and being unable to regulate her emotions and being unable to not physically abuse her own child. And that the way it ends is by her hand going numb and her having to leave as a way of controlling herself. She needs to abandon her daughter to not physically abuse her. We will later see her abandoning her daughter on large scales too, of literally going on holidays without her. And it's a bad coping mechanism because it means she's never really addressing the underlying problem, she's just abdicating the situation. And it comes from Rosa's position in the family of being the youngest, being the one that will get like shit upon the easiest and has to just follow the whims of all the older siblings who have more power and control of a situation, and will often use Rosa in weird ways. Earlier, in the arguments between Kraus and the other siblings, Kraus and Ava would like invoke Rosa as like a bargaining chip, almost like, hey, side with me and we can get stuff done, in a way that seems like it would often happen. Like she's almost like a tie-breaking vote that you can pull to one side or the other because she has no real convictions or position of her own. And then that trickles down to, she is the youngest, she feels like she needs a punching bag, and her daughter provides a convenient punching bag. And she provides a punching bag for other concerns and stresses in Rosa's life in general. We'll see a little bit more of that later. The pretty striking thing is the way in which Rosa will put blame upon Maria. That Rosa insists Maria has to change her speaking habits, and that's the only reason she doesn't have friends. And of course, speaking of cycles of abuse, Rosa perfectly encapsulates it by both perpetuating the abuse, having to physically remove herself from the situation to prevent going further, then coming back, apologizing, appeasing Maria, insisting that it won't happen again, and also degrading herself for being a bad mother in a way that's not addressing the problem. She makes herself feel bad for what she has done, but she's not actually changing the pattern. She's not making a concerted effort to improve things. She's only saying, I'm so awful, I'm a horrible mother, oh, what's wrong with me? She's just furthering the ways in which she will victimize herself and then lash out at Maria when she gets overly stressed about whatever is stressing her on that particular day. Nothing is being resolved, which is why this cycle will continue, and this will happen again. Honestly, might even happen this episode. I don't 100% remember. I fully remembered just how bad Rosa's abuse of Maria is, and it's going to be worse in later episodes where it gets a lot more screen time. I forgot how bad it was seeing the other kids just hold back and be incredibly uncomfortable and ultimately not intervene in any way. Battler does make an effort because he understands what's wrong, and he's trying to intervene to do what he can in the situation. He is a child, he doesn't have the authority to tell Rosa what to do, but he's still trying to step in and kind of be like, I don't think this is what should be happening here right now. And Rosa, because she is still mid-rage, is literally telling him off, giving her justifications, explaining why she needs to physically educate Maria in ways that are all bullshit justifications. And Jessica effectively stays neutral, and George is actually pro, well, it's a parent's job to figure it out. He is taking the quote-unquote mature stance of a parent who understands the difficulties of raising a child, and Maria really should be more mature and neurotypical and slot into society easier, and the fact that she doesn't, it's quite difficult for Rosa. George fully buys into Rosa's justifications, and I'm not 100% sure if it's that George has seen this before, because I don't get the sense that it's brand new to George. And it's perhaps these are the justifications George has made before to make himself feel better about not intervening. Or to what extent George is sincerely believing in these things. I get more of the impression that he sincerely believes in these things, especially with later events, that George will now and then play the part of kind of the mature person who has grown up and has accepted his role in society as a working man and what that entails. And it sucks that Battler's attempt to do the right thing to help Maria and protect her gets barreled over because he will ultimately fall in line with George, who is basically saying what is expected of them as children in this situation. That ultimately all the kids settle on the comfortable status quo of, well, it's not our business. So let's leave her. I'm sure it'll be fine. It's probably for the best. And I promise I'm almost done with this, but it is heartbreaking. One of the most striking but awful reveals of later in the game is that Maria's ooh noise is a spell. It's a spell to bring her good mother back. Now, I don't think that literally every time Maria says ooh ooh, she is specifically thinking, I want my mother to be nice and actually love me. Or, we will talk about Maria and Rosa's relationship and love in more detail as this episode goes on, but to put it more simply for now, I don't think it's the case that literally every time Maria says ooh ooh, she is trying to call a more generous and caring mother back into being and to disband the evil witch version of Rosa. But especially when she's stressed, especially when Rosa is snipping at her, especially when Rosa is hitting her, even as Rosa is physically hitting her and insisting, just stop saying that word, just stop. Maria continues to say it because she's desperately hoping to have the mother that she loves, that cares for her, and would absolutely never hit her. Because to Maria, there is Rosa, her mother, and there is a strange and evil witch who looks just like her mother, but does awful things to her. But Rosa cannot abide this signifier of childishness, which not that Rosa knows this, is an aspect of Maria believing in magic and witches. But even just aside from that, comes off as childish, immature, does not fit with the role that is expected of Maria, especially as she gets older, especially as she's supposed to be representative of her family, her rich family. And scapegoating this single signifier as the problem, the reason Maria doesn't have friends, is patently fake when there are other reasons people have difficulty communicating with Maria and that Maria struggles to communicate with other people. And there are lots of reasons why Maria might not readily make friends or easily engage with the people in her school. It is not the case that if Maria listened to her mother and just stopped saying "awoo" and changed nothing else, she would not suddenly have a solid friendship relationship with multiple peers, because that is simply not what the issue is. But it is something that Rosa can snap at, that irritates her in particular and pushes on buttons that brings out horrible reactions from her. And of course we finish part 7 with Kinzo flinging the ring out into the storm, enacting the revival of Beatrice. Before I specifically engage with what this scene might mean, how did Beatrice get the ring? What did Kraus and Natsuhi do with the ring? Because Kinzo, well, I guess he might be wearing it, but he's certainly not in a state to hold on to it and insist that only he has it the way everyone talks about later. I mean, I think I'll talk ahead a little bit because the ring is important because Beatrice's letter is sealed with wax and has a symbol of the head. This is meant to be proof that it was a message from the head himself. It's pretty useless as proof. For a start, people suggest that one could quite easily make a fake stamp, which is true if you have a wax seal. Well, I don't know exactly how true this is, but if you had a wax seal, it's not inconceivable to think you might be able to reverse engineer at least approximately the correct shape. Maybe with close analysis you could prove that one is incorrect and just missing certain features or whatever. At least just at a glance with the human eye, you could hardly be definitive about its veracity. And even more useless, even without having a fake, it's a ring. It's not actually glued onto his finger. Someone could take it, especially because he's dead. Not that any of them know that, of course, but his force of personality doesn't mean that no one else could ever take away the ring. However, it does kind of have a significance as a representation of his power. And so, again, I have to ask the question. What would Kraus and Natsuhi have done with a ring from Kinzo once he had died? Thinking on this a little bit, and especially with the way they wholeheartedly buy into the story of Kinzo not being dead, absolutely not, they must have left it in his room. They must have decided that taking it out of the room, having it theoretically be discovered, ever attempting to use it in themselves, all of these things would just be risks that could cause them to get found out. Given that, I would have to assume it's just being kept in the room so that in theory it's with Kinzo, where it should be. Given that, is the scene where Kinzo is throwing it out into the storm, in a funny way, is that a scene of Beatrice throwing it outside while she happens to be in the room so she can take the ring later. She can go outside later herself, take the ring, and use it. Because here's where we get into some funky stuff. I'm hopping around a lot this episode, but later on, after the letter has been read, Shannon and Canon are saying, is it true that Beatrice is back? They don't know what Beatrice has done. They don't share information with Beatrice, or Beatrice doesn't share information with them, might be more accurate. So they are not on the same page, the way Shannon and Canon are, that Canon tells Shannon things. So does that mean that either Shannon or Canon, presumably Canon since we've seen him in the room, at one point Beatrice took charge of the body, took the ring, flung it out the window, basically to just sneakily extract an item she could use for her schemes, for her own meddling and teasing of people. And then, almost seamlessly, Canon doesn't realize what has just happened, doesn't know what the body has done, because Beatrice does not share her mind in the same way. It is what I have to assume, especially with the way in which, as depicted, Kinzo is flinging out the ring and saying, with this, Beatrice is resurrected. I guess conceivably Kinzo as a personality is maybe in the body. That gets into more complex things about the story of Kinzo still being alive and the people maintaining it and who's physically present to maintain that story. I don't think I have enough justification to really believe these things, so I am reading it as we are shown Kinzo doing this, but it is effectively the person Beatrice who is throwing it. And what is funny is the fact that the ring exists and anyone could take this ring because there is no Kinzo to stop them. Well, anyone who has access to this room could take the ring because there is no Kinzo to stop them. But none of them do. It is Beatrice who reaches through a veil that makes it seem as though Kinzo's alive, and she reaches through that veil to take control of the overall narrative with her magic. She is now taking control of the story, and she's plucked the ring to instigate that, to basically put a stir among the siblings, and to start off them attempting to solve the riddle, and the rest of the murder game that's about to play out. But okay, having said all that, let's now talk about part 8, which we've already been talking about. Having said that, let's roll back in the dinner a little bit. So before the letter even happens, Rosa's trying to figure out who gave Maria an umbrella. And there's a specific line that stood out to me of, why wouldn't someone take credit for giving the umbrella? And there's something kind of funny here. I might be reading that too closely, but it is funny that they literally can't imagine any reason why anyone would not simply say, oh, I did this nice thing for this child. That they don't think there's any reason someone might need to protect themselves. They don't think there's any reason someone might feel like they would be ridiculed or not believed. Like, Maria has told them an answer and they've laughed at her. And again, she tells everyone at this dinner and they all laugh at her here. They do not accept Maria's answer of Beatrice as real. It is the correct answer. And if Beatrice herself came in and said, I did it, everyone would be maybe not laughing, but they would not be like, oh, I guess Beatrice is a person then. We will respect her existence. So it's a bit of a lack of imagination on Rosa's part to think there's definitely no reason someone wouldn't say they did a good thing. Beatrice's letter is a fun addendum to the legend of the gold, because on its face, the letter is still pretty silly. At least in some ways. It still uses kind of fanciful language like the epitaph does. It refers to gold and alchemy. It's very easy to kind of look at that letter and you can pick out multiple things and be like, well, this is clearly not just objective truth. However, the siblings do hear the contents of this letter and they treat them with real seriousness. This is a threat to them. And like with the legend of the gold, they don't believe it whole cloth. They don't believe verbatim exactly what's being written here, because there's clearly some flowery language that they will just gloss right over. But they do extract the elements that ring true. The gold may not be real, but represents real hidden wealth. The witch is a woman who's tormenting them, but offers a kind of strange bargain for reasons that they can't quite grasp. And presumably they're reading this as her mocking them. She's playing with them, which is true. She's giving them a game to play. But they're presumably reading that as toying with them because she seems to have access to a huge wealth that would solve a lot of their problems, and she's dangling that in front of them. And they deserve it.
And moving on to part 9 as well now, because we're covering a lot of ground today. So briefly, the North Wind and Sun, for some reason I had assumed it was like a Japanese thing. It's just an Aesop fable. It's just about the North Wind being like harsh and critical, negative, doesn't get results, and then the Sun being really like positive and sunny and nice gets results. I won't bore you with the specifics of the story, but basically it being a fable, the kind of point of the story is that kindness is more persuasive than harshness. Which in this case is funny because of how it's being used for pure manipulation. Kyrie's point is not, oh, it's so awful that people are being horrible to Maria. Kyrie's point is, these idiots, if they were nice to her, then she would listen, she would do what we want. And like, not necessarily that harsh per se, but at the end of the day, that is the thing she wants. She wants answers, and she knows that a better method would be being nice. That doesn't mean she is necessarily being that much nicer, although it would at least spare Maria's feelings better. But it is basically just an act where she wants specific results and is not getting them from what the other siblings are doing, because all of them are idiots, to be fair. What's extra a little bit funny about this to me is that she will then later in this conversation try to manipulate Battler to manipulate Maria on her behalf. Basically reasoning like, oh, you kids will do a better job of handling Maria when she's like this. And, oh, don't you want to solve the mystery? I think that'd be pretty good. Maybe you should try talking to Maria and cheering her up and finding answers. Also, this will not be the last we hear of the North Wind and the Sun, because that is going to be Beatrice's tactic in episode 3, which again is going to be incredibly fake and a lot of fun. And here we get introduced to turning the chessboard around. And I find it very funny here, because later Battler will cop to this eventually, but turning the chessboard around here is not working, because Kyrie and Battler both lack a fundamental, foundational understanding of the other person. They don't understand Beatrice, Beatrice's life, Beatrice's existence, so they cannot actually intuit or read her moves or her maneuvers, and so they can't read her overall strategy because they just don't even know step 1. They don't even know step 0. They don't even know where she has come from before doing any of her plan here. Or they make a set of assertions where they declare, given this information, it is impossible that there could be a 19th person on this island. And that's based on their particular understanding of what a person is. Because they're thinking, well, there are 18 bodies on this island. There is not a 19th body, so there is not a 19th person. Therefore, Beatrice is not a real person and is just a faker among us. What they don't realize is there are not 18 bodies on this island, as we will later come to see, and Beatrice will reveal to Battler and break his mind, because a person is not just a body. And Kyrie and Battler don't understand this, because they have the most simplistic, naive assumption of a person and body is one and the same, therefore there must be 18, therefore there is no Beatrice. But in reality, they've already seen 2 people in the same body and accepted that as true. They're just not aware of the fact that they've been doing that. Likewise, Kyrie might know, but Battler definitely does not, that Kinzo is dead. They have not even properly observed his body, but still consider him a person, because of the limited information they're exposed to. The problem is that they're both making assumptions about how the world works that are somewhat inflexible, but that they're also very confident in their reasoning. There is a point at which Kyrie says, I mean, yes, this line of thought is based on several assumptions, and if you turned those around, if you upturned any of those, it wouldn't work. But I'm still pretty sure it's all true. And this kind of narrow stubbornness, Kyrie has a little bit here, but Battler is going to be stuck with it for quite a while, and that is going to be his whole journey to get over that. And part of the difficulty with this turning the chessboard around thing, and Battler will highlight this later, is that it does not work when your opponent is not equivalent to you. And that's not the same as equal, necessarily, or like on par, but Beatrice is just a different person. And Beatrice has had a life and Beatrice has an existence that is not the same as Battler's or Kyrie's. So they can't put themselves in her shoes entirely. It's not that it's literally impossible, but they are making assumptions based on their life experiences that she just simply would not, because she understands magic in a way that they do not. And you can see this later when Rudolph turns up and Kyrie demonstrates to Battler, it's like, oh hey, I understand the psychology of this man. And it's like, well yes, because you know who he is, you understand him, you know the ways in which he operates. This is exactly where the chessboard thinking can work, because you can look at things from his perspective and you know what his perspective is. But when you don't know who the other person on the other side is, it can be hard to really look at things from their point of view and understand them. And especially that's going to be difficult if your starting point is not acknowledging that you don't know them and then needing to get to know them. If your starting point is just what's considered reasonable. This kind of incredulous disbelief is exactly why Beatrice cannot appear openly. They make a lot of hay of the fact that a person would just appear, and that's just an assumption that they can make, without understanding that there are people who could not appear. There are reasons a person could not just openly appear in front of people, but could alert people to their own existence. But since they do not see that possibility, instead they can only read these things as contradictory. Which of course leads me to the question, what exactly is Beatrice's game in this episode? There are two things that seem to make sense to me in this moment, which is to kind of play with the family, play with the Ashura Miyas, and get them to hoist themselves. Just dangle a little trap right in front of them and watch as they fight each other over it. Like, watch the family fall apart, watch them give in to their worst impulses, watch them be the worst versions of themselves, watch them be so greedy that they will tear each other apart instead of uniting to try and solve the riddle. We'll see in later episodes that the riddle is quite solvable for them. Once they work together, they do actually manage to puzzle it out, even in cases where they're not fully all working together, where maybe in one case they're just talking and thinking about it gives enough inspiration for Ava to go figure out the rest herself. And likewise, Rosa also manages to figure out at that time. So it's not that it's impossible, it's not a genius level riddle, but if they're going to spend all that time just fighting each other, then they're not going to get anywhere. And that is certainly a way you would imagine this shaking out. I do think there's also the distinct possibility that she is almost testing the waters to see if there's any chance that they could accept her as a person, because she is introducing the notion of a 19th person, and whether or not the family will accept that, whether or not the family could even remotely come to the realization that she is a person and that she exists. And maybe not the family broadly, maybe Battler in particular, because of the way in which Beatrice has beef with Battler. We'll get more into that when we see how this plays out for Battler in particular, but I think also just more of that is going to be worth talking about when Beatrice is directly talking to Battler. And then at the end we get some Natsuhi scenes that kind of dig into her life situation a little bit more. There's a big misunderstanding happening between Kraus and Natsuhi that's a little bit tragic, but also some of the bad behaviors he has learned in his time as an Ashura. He is entirely fixated on the idea that he, as the heir to the Ashura family, needs to be a monolith, needs to stand independent, strong, not require anyone, not depend on his wife for anything whatsoever, not share very crucial information with her, and instead be the sole person who knows it. He does need Natsuhi. She does a ton of work managing the house. She does her best to defend him from the other siblings when they're jostling with each other. Whether or not that is necessary or helpful is a different question, but it is undeniable that she is doing her very best there. she, crucially, is the one who weaves a story about Kinzo still being alive in order to protect him from the consequences of his own embezzling and terrible investments. He would crumble in that situation because he is pig-headed and pretending that everything's going to be fine and he just needs a tiny bit of time, while she is very aware of the reality of the situation and very capable of making a narrative of the situation. He was not in any place to do that himself. But the problem is that he is stuck being dedicated to his own narrative of being the heir, being powerful, independent, being the oldest sibling. His role was to be the one on top, and he cannot relinquish that. Even as it is clear that he does need help and he's not fully independent. Maybe because of the ways in which it is clear he is not independent, he feels a stronger need to push Natsuhi out. He's showing her the gold in this situation because he is finally letting her in to say, hey, I've kept this secret and honestly it's a lot and it's been in my head and now it's just become even more real, and so he lets her in finally so she can also be aware of this. And then afterwards his response is, but you don't need to worry about it, you should probably just go to bed. I don't need you for literally anything. I think it's best you're just entirely unaware of the situation. And it's tragic that she's reading this and she is taking the on-the-face assertion that he doesn't need her and not fully recognizing the way in which this is bluster and it's not true, even though he's trying to convince both of them that it is. And you could definitely make a more charitable read where he did not tell her about the gold because he didn't want to burden her. She does have headaches. She does get stressed and passionate. She clearly does not handle it well when the siblings are shit-talking him. So there's an understandable impulse to try to remove her from having to deal with that situation. But the way it comes off to her is just, no, don't worry about it. You go away. Entirely unimportant. This is a Shurimiya business. I will do it. So that deals with Cress's narrative. Natsuhi, we're getting more hints of her backstory, but in particular the moment that underscores that she was forced into this situation in some way, presumably money troubles or family difficulties, needing to make powerful connections. Something along those lines necessitated that she married into the Shurimiya family, and not just married in, but just wholeheartedly took on that as her new family, took that as her new place to be, and just said, I am here now. This is me. And in response to this difficult situation, she has woven her own narrative of, I am the dedicated wife. I am here for this. I am here for my husband. I'm here for my family. I am going to prop up this whole family's power and prestige. Because the thing is, it is less painful to sever ties with her old family and pretend that this is what she truly wants in all ways, than it is to confront the idea that she didn't choose this and was forced into it. And lastly, we get a much better moment of connection between Natsuhi and Jessica. Because it's very clumsy and they misunderstand each other still at a couple points, and they don't quite see eye to eye on things, but they do get to have a genuine connection, a genuine moment of empathy. Unlike earlier with Cress and Natsuhi, Jessica and Natsuhi think about things from the other's perspective. Jessica's whole strange crisis in this situation is having seen how her mother acts in a way that she's unfamiliar with, and then immediately after seeing her mother being vulnerable, is giving her whiplash of kind of understanding the range of ways her mother is a person. Seeing her mother being greedy, at least in Jessica's eyes, is a shock to the system to understand that her mother might be a bad person. Her mother might be actually kind of shitty and might be in a power play to try and secure money and prestige and such. But then in quick succession, she gets to find out her mother is actually quite vulnerable and is not unaffected by all of these things. And Jessica doesn't quite get the full understanding of, oh, my mother's really hard on me, because she feels a need to push me for my sake, for the family's sake, for the sake of her husband, in order to prevent the headship being usurped away from Jessica. Like, Jessica doesn't come to understand this in its entirety, but she comes to realize that Natsuhi is not just a nagging mother that does care about her abstractly. She comes to realize that Natsuhi has a lot of other shit going on, and that she doesn't know what all of that shit is, but it does mean she can extend some empathy to realize there is more to this person than I could have guessed at. I am looking forward a lot to seeing this in particular develop, because I know in this first episode Natsuhi survives all the way to the end, and we get to see a lot more about her and how she handles different situations and ways in which maybe she is still a shitty person, but is maybe trying to protect her family also. So we'll have much more opportunity to discuss her character in depth, and I'll be paying close attention to how Jessica responds to seeing her in these situations. With that, next time, I'm pretty sure we're going to get to have spoiler time about actual murder episodes, which is going to be a lot of fun. It also means I can start to spin up my brain thinking about logistically, how is this version of the murder happening? Murders, I suppose. But until then, thank you for watching, and see you next episode.